This evening, we will go ahead and ask our clerk to call the roll.
Trustee Blair.
Present.
Trustee Hendricks.
Present.
Trustee Page.
Present.
Trustee Krusek.
Present.
Trustee Abbott.
Present.
Trustee Martinez.
Present.
Madam Mayor.
Present. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. This evening, we will be presenting and actually have a guest speaker here that will present for us the adult use cannabis for recreational use, and as a matter of helping the board arrive to the policies for the Village of Woodridge. So I would like to ask our village administrator, please, to introduce our guest speaker, who is Joe McGuire. Al?
Yeah, and just for the benefit of the audience, the purposes of this evening is going to be informational in nature, and so the board certainly will have an opportunity to ask questions of our guest speaker, but it is not necessarily meant to have any formal vote tonight, just to clarify, and no necessarily any formal deliberation on the merits of whether to legalize or not to legalize the sale of cannabis in Woodridge. So that will take place, or begin to take place, on November 7th, and then our intent into the future is to actually have a formal village vote in our first meeting in December. So just to kind of give the context of today's meeting. But allow me then to introduce our guest speaker here. Joe McGuire is the CEO and president of 5 Minutes of Courage, where she uses her experience as a subject matter expert to focus on the impact of legal marijuana policies on young people, families, workplaces, and communities. Joe is the founding chairman of the board of directors for the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association and advocates for safe and drug-free workplaces worldwide. Joe is also assists educators with classroom and assembly-style presentations aimed at youth drug prevention and parent awareness and education. She also serves as the senior project manager for TSS Incorporated, which is a third-party administrator in the drug testing industry, and is a featured speaker on the National Marijuana Initiative's Speakers Bureau. As the program manager for a statewide prevention initiative focused on school violence prevention, Joe developed projects for risk reduction, increased education and prevention programs in the field of youth intervention and school safety. She received recognition by the Colorado Department of Public Safety, the Colorado State Patrol, the Safe to Tell Board of Directors, and the Colorado Springs Police Department for her outstanding achievements in the field of school safety and critical infrastructure management. She has also worked extensively with public and private foundations in the collaborative efforts for community wellness, awareness, and education. In 2013, she was appointed to serve on the Colorado Governor's Task Force, which was convened to recommend a legislative framework for the regulation of marijuana after the passage of Amendment 64. As part of the Taxation, Banking, and Civil Law Work Group, Joe lent her expertise in the form of recommendations for drug and alcohol testing in the workplace. She also represented the national drug and alcohol testing industry at the 2016 United Nations General Assembly to address world drug agreements. And finally, Joe has also joined efforts with concerned citizens around the state of Colorado in grassroots efforts focused on bringing proven medical research and scientific data to the forefront of the national effort to legalize marijuana in the U.S. Joe works closely with national health experts to educate state and federal policymakers on the importance of public health pertaining to drug and alcohol testing practices and policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me come. So glad to be here, and I welcome any of your questions that you may have. And we'll just jump right in because I have a lot of material, and some of it I'll go through quickly. I do want the trustees to know that you will be able to get a PDF of these slides in case you would like any of the information further. One of the things that I do want to point out is that in Colorado, 2/3 of our counties did opt out of adult retail sales, as it was called in the state of Colorado. So we have 64 counties total, 42 opted out immediately, 36 continue to opt out, so you can see 4 reversed. After the moratorium ended, they kind of wanted to see what other counties did and how it went. 13 went all in with full functions, operations, and whatnot, and then 13 others that are included in the top 42 allowed some pieces, but not all. So they said, you know, you're going to have some labs here, some testing facilities, or some manufacturing, but not necessarily retail. So that's kind of how the makeup has fallen out in our state. One of the struggles that we've really had in the whole scheme of things is oversaturation. Many of the counties, in fact, a good majority of them, did not limit the number of facilities that were available. So this is just one example for Denver City and County alone. They have more establishments by almost double than Starbucks and McDonald's combined, and you can throw Walmarts in there, you can throw drugstores in there, and it still pales in comparison. So that's a problem, because one of the intents of this was to remove the black market, but in fact oversaturation continues to contribute to that black market. And so now we have a new term, we kind of call it the gray market, because it's technically from a legal grow, but sources may be getting it outside of the tax and regulate scheme. So that's just something to consider. Also, we've had a lot of people who struggle with the blatant commercialization, like you see here. This is around 420, and these are just like your normal newspapers that you have, and so there's concern about kids getting exposure to that, and there's a lot of things that we see, like discounts with student IDs, and I always point out this one that I feel was a little over the top with a free 8th edible with an appliance repair. You know, certainly not what was intended by having a strong tax and regulate system. And so often I'll go and speak to students like on college campuses. They'll ask me to come in so we can have some open discussion and they can express how they feel about it. And I really find it interesting that the young people in our college system don't like this, because they think that's kind of a mockery of what it was intended to be. And it's hard not to agree with them, because that's not typically what we see voters thinking that this was going to be about. So just, you know, caution on that. The other thing is the products that are really obviously marketed to children or ripoffs of branded products. I do think there are things that communities can do to try to work toward doing this better. And I think many states have learned lessons from Colorado here and have tried to put some fences around some of these products. However, a lot of them, it just comes with the territory. So I think that really getting together with business owners to say we don't want the young people marketed to per se could be a good conversation to have. Again, here's some commercialization. You know, Santa Claus has his pack of marijuana buds. Fred Flintstone is Yabba Dabba Dabbing. Dabs are concentrates that are very popular. Here's a dollar joint with your ski pass. Here's a discount with a medical card or student ID. There's also a version of this ad that has a coupon for military discount. Military are not allowed to participate in any of these products whatsoever. So keeping an eye on that and making sure that the business owners are staying compliant with state and federal law. Again, with commercialization, this is a facility that went up in my community for a period of time until Sesame Street came in and said cease and desist from using Cookie Monster to market on your facility, very clearly aimed at children, but a marijuana dispensary. So things like that we find to be tasteless. Here's something that was unexpected in my community. I actually do live in one of the communities that opted out of the retail sales, but adult use is legal everywhere. Home grows are legal everywhere. So this, there's a couple of these that have popped up. They're gas and grass stations, and they're of course labeled with the Green Cross as a medical dispensary. And this was another one of those things that the college kids really called me out on as a citizen in the community and said, you know, you grown-ups need to stop this. And I said, how old are you? You know, we all should, right, our city council. So this kind of it does continue. It's open and thriving, and it does cause some challenges, but it is what it is. A lot of people are very unaware of what we refer to as concentrates, and there's a variety of names for these products. They're extracts. They're usually made with butane or propane, extremely high concentrate in THC. So just a brief explanation is that in the Woodstock era, the THC concentrate in a cannabis plant was approximately 1 to 3%. When Colorado legalized in 2012, the THC potency was 12 to 15% in the natural plant. We were told at the time by the industry, people were really getting upset about, well, how high is this going to go? Our law and yours allows for 100%. And the industry said you can't get that high. It breaks down in the natural plant. THC does once you get over about 20%. And research shows that to be true scientifically. However, this was before we had really intense genetic modification and before we knew about these products. So these are extracting the THC with high heat, and then these products typically start around 60% THC. They now are bragging as high as 99%. So we have a lot of advertisements you can find by dispensaries and retail shops online that show you have to do public service announcements on these products for the marijuana naive. They can have dangerous consequences for those who have never used anything like this before, rendering them unconscious, poisoned, etc. So we have campaigns in Colorado through our Department of Public Health called Start Low, Go Slow. And so these really pack a punch. The industry says one hit of a concentrate is equal to about 26 hits of a traditional joint. I don't know what THC potency that's at, but we in the U.S. are not allowed to study these products and the impact they have on the adolescent brain because that's considered unethical. Is how toxic these can be for young people. Again, though, we see these products on billboards. This billboard went up on a major highway right over a local high school. And when that happened, the school administrators called for some presentations and education because they saw youth use go up dramatically in the school when this billboard went up. We are seeing that we have higher than the national average adult and youth rates, even though we hear some things contradictory about that with our youth. That is an in-state survey that does not include the greatest population of school districts that we have in the dense city areas. It really is confined to the rural areas because it's a voluntary survey. So according to Substance and Mental Health Services Administration, our adult use is 103% higher than the national average. Our youth use is 59% higher than the national average. 12 and older, you'll see, is 85% higher. We did hit #1 in the nation for youth use a few years ago in that SAMHSA study, National Survey of Drug Use and Health. We had never been up there before. And you can see the states on the bottom that have at this time, so this was a few years ago, no form of legal marijuana, didn't have as high of numbers as those who do, with a few exceptions in there. So just some interesting data to be aware of, and to really make sure that we're restricting, not only restricting the commercialization to our kids, but we need some really good education. And unfortunately, I can't say that we have found anything very successful that we've been able to use in educating our youth at this point. We've got some experimental things out there. We've got some youth giving input to those things. Some hit and some don't. Unfortunately, what we see is a lot of the campaigns that are put out by the state have a real comedic spin to them, and so kids find it more funny rather than educational on the risks to them. So this is National Survey of Drug Use and Health that came out just this past September. Now we have 45,000 more teens regularly using marijuana, users more likely to abuse opioids. We are also seeing that in our state. Marijuana use disorder is increasing. That is actually the disorder that is listed in the diagnostics criteria manual and treated by drug treatment providers as the addiction that can come from overuse and abuse. You could see we've had 100 per day increase of first-time users daily over previous studies. First-time use onset 12 to 25 years of age. So we really see gearing toward the younger market. And then approximately 4.4 million people aged 12 and up had a marijuana use disorder in the past year. So these are all increases year over year. And you can find that online at SAMHSA, or you can also look up NISDA. One of the outcomes that we are seeing in a huge way, and I think we're all hearing more and more about this in the news these days, is the vaping epidemic, particularly among children. We now consider this to be one of the greatest epidemics that we have with young kids. But the number one market for vape products in our state are our middle school kids. So this is some, I mean, the products are easy to get online or at convenience stores. You can go to your local gas station. You can get everything you need there. And again, not the intent of what this was supposed to be with control and taxation. These are just some examples of some products that have come out and been endorsed by the cannabis. One is the Puffit, which looks like an asthma inhaler, but it's actually a marijuana vape device. And it's marketed to be, discreet and used in public, and so they kind of make light of the public use ban. So again, just things to watch out for. Just speaking of vaping, I'm going to go through this really quickly in this piece and not dwell too much, but this is the most popular product with kids is the Juul. They're very tiny, like a flash drive, as you can see, smaller than that. And this is what kids really, it's their number one choice for in taking the marijuana products, the cannabis-related cartridges and whatnot. So we see increased use of continuing tobacco use. Heavy metals are in there. It's marketed as a quit smoking device, but actually we know that that's not always the outcome. So it's marketed with a lot of the same popularity. I just wanted, one of the things I want to hit on are the sweet flavors that make this so attractive to kids. It's a strategy used by Big Tobacco when they came before Congress as marketing to kids to get a new customer base. And so what we see is these are marijuana products in the marijuana stores or cannabis shops. Grandma's apple pie, the Fanta ripoffs from the sodas, Candy King. These are, obviously very popular candy for young people. Not something you would see your typical adult in the market for. So it's pretty obvious. And then we see the risks, and there's a lot of, you could see the marketing is geared toward consumer conversion. So a lot of people will say, well, the vapes are really nicotine products, but then you'll have these whole lines that are really advertising them specifically for cannabis, especially medical cannabis. This is a local high school principal on the western slope, which is very rural Colorado, and the full picture in this article that featured him, his desk is just full of devices that he says this is what we've just found in a 4-day period in our school. So it really is rampant, and I think it's also not just about educating the kids, but parents. Because parents really do get the message that, well, this is a safe alternative for our kids. It's safer than alcohol. It's, if they're going to do something, then we want them to do this. And often you'll see that kids are getting this because mom and dad are supplying it. And they don't understand the risks and harms that they're putting their kids in, especially with the developing adolescent brain. But now we're seeing the danger to the lungs. And so I'm going to leave these in here for you to peruse later rather than dwelling on this too much. One of the things that we have seen is an increase in school suspensions and disciplinary actions. You could break these down by the various offenses, and marijuana pales any other reason for disciplinary action. Our dropout rates have increased significantly. Toxicology amongst our suicides in our state at all age contain marijuana more than any other substance, to include alcohol. We do have some very serious mental health issues going on with these higher concentrates. And I didn't spend a lot of time putting those slides into this presentation because this is a little different. But if you want to take a look at what our mental health diagnoses has been, it really is quite alarming with these products. Again, I mentioned the black market. These are from the Rocky Mountain HIDTA report, high intensity drug trafficking area. These are parcels that are seized outside of the state of Colorado. And That may not be something that's necessarily concerning your community, but again, it comes down to that saturation. So we're seeing a lot of this seized through the post office, through FedEx, through UPS, and other type venues. So just something to be aware of, that with oversaturation, you create this whole undercurrent that is unfortunate. You have some people who are trying to stretch the boundaries of the law, like home delivery, which undercuts, again, your tax and regulate scheme. They present this as a gift because most states allow some type of gifting process, and then you just reimburse them for their gas at whatever the market rate is for the marijuana. So these are things that bend and stretch the rules, and some communities might be tempted to sort of look the other way. However, you don't get those tax dollars. That's going into the cash area, and not a good idea. And then I don't really know how you monitor internet, Craigslist, whatnot. Again, it's a whole realm. State Patrol refers to this as gray market because it's just widely available. But once again, no tax scheme there. We have had an issue with marijuana-related exposures, and again, this goes back to those concentrates. When you have products that are that high in a concentrate, and you get particularly your younger children or your senior population exposed to those, and they're not used to that, or it's toxic to the young brain, we see a lot of emergency room visits, and this is where our exposures come into play. Hospitalizations have increased, so I don't know what your community deals with as far as medical expenses. That might be more on a state level, but it's something to pay attention to, that there are some communities who are struggling to get physicians in to treat these conditions because of safety. We've had some communities who have said, we just can't even have a homeless shelter anymore because we don't feel like our people are safe. That goes in line again with the mental health issues that we have. People will often forego their traditional medications because they think the cannabis will treat everything, but it can exacerbate the mental health conditions. You have something cyclical happening here, and it's frustrating. I don't know that we've come up with any great solutions on that, but again, some education and awareness, and trying to get ahead of the game there, potentially. As I mentioned before, our opioid deaths dropped slightly initially, but now have gone up to national averages. So it's not the solution for the opioid crisis. We can't set that aside and not address it because we are bringing in adult marijuana use or cannabis use. We need to continue to remember that the opioid crisis is very serious, and it's a different issue. And the reality of it is those two substances impact completely different parts of the brain where the addiction centers, and so we just have to make sure that we're communicating with our mental health and addiction professionals so that we're approaching this not from necessarily a political or a popular point of view, but from a scientific point of view. So again, we have some science listed here with marijuana and the increased risk of developing schizophrenia. It's been said for many years that we don't know what comes first here, the chicken or the egg. And what we mean by that when we say that in the world of prevention is that many people believe that marijuana causes onset of mental health disorders, but then we really are starting to feel more strongly that it can cause early onset of underlying mental health disorders. So, but there's no one has proven that to be one way or the other. We do know that there are people who have had psychotic breaks that claim to have no mental health history, problematic mental health history in their families. But by and large, it does seem to be that if there's an underlying mental health condition, cannabis use, early cannabis use and chronic cannabis use can trigger earlier symptoms and kind of exacerbate that. So again, education, but also I don't want to fail to mention the adolescent brain. We know from longitudinal studies for decades that come from the Dunedin study in New Zealand that chronic adolescent use can cause a potential loss of IQ of 8 points, which is a big gap for a young person. We banned lead paint in our country because of a potential IQ loss of 3 points. This 8-point loss does not regain over a lifetime. It causes structural brain change. So even though I know the law is not for youth, what I see in my community when I go talk to youth, and I do regularly, I will say, are you aware that this law is only for adults? And they don't believe me. They think we legalized cannabis for everyone. They're not hearing, through the adolescent filter that this is not for you. So making sure that our community is aware of that, again, parents and youth, maybe even having some education in schools about that. Again, with the ingestion among children under 9 years of age, this is concerning to see. Our local health department has started some educational programs about lock boxes and safely storing products. Our child-proof packaging coming out of the stores is not always that child-proof. I learned 5 different categories that FDA approves of child-proofing. The lowest one is Ziploc bags. We're one grade above that, and it's an opaque Ziploc bag. So kids see a Rice Krispie treat or a brownie or a cookie or gummies or whatever in an opaque Ziploc bag. They can get them unlocked before I can, typically. And, a lot of those products have 10 and 20 servings of THC per bite. Like a gummy bear can be anywhere from 5 to 15 servings in a gummy bear. And, you don't have a kid who's going to eat a leg of a gummy bear. They're going to pop a few. So we end up having these kids who need to be respirated, to have breathing assistance and whatnot because they get this exposure. So we really need, again, better education. We did have an increase initially of these extract labs exploding because people were making these products in their homes. That the state did crack down on. Now, I don't know what your state has decided to do yet or not, but this is something really to pay attention to and to work closely with local law enforcement on. We have tried very hard to limit this to the commercial production with safety inspections and closed loop systems rather than just allowing people to create these products in their home because it is very dangerous when these explosions occur. They are very hard for law enforcement initially to differentiate between a meth lab explosion until they get in and see, what the products are there that have caused the explosion to occur. So this is just a quick photo of what some of those look like. With the home grows, you may or may not have a lot of control over this in a sense, but there's really no way to really keep a lid on this. So you again need to work with law enforcement to understand how do you spot violations, because whether or not the state or the community is really wild about allowing these to flourish, this is where we have a lot of the violations taking place. So you have a lot of people coming in, buying homes in gated communities because there's extra security, gutting them, converting the HVAC to an internal system, and setting up massive grows. It's not just your gated communities, it's all throughout the community. But if neighbors start complaining about, a really strong odor, not just someone standing on their back porch enjoying adult use, but I mean like 24/7 vents blowing externally into their home, or electricity lines being tapped into, increased water use that's beyond anything that should be happening in a normal community. Need to really work with law enforcement on what to do about those violations and to make sure we're keeping our communities safe. Oftentimes those raids, unfortunately, can contain weapons because people have a tendency to fight each other over this product. This is something that can come of a secret THC extraction lab, and these are butane and propane cans that are discarded. So just, again, watching out for those things. We have had an increase in crime, and a lot of people will say, well, initially the crime went down. Some of those crimes were cherry-picked initially, so I would make sure to look at Colorado Bureau of Investigation. We have seen in the long run property and violent crimes increase year over year. And again, is it causation or correlation? It may at this point simply be correlation, but I know that speaking with local law enforcement, they will say, when we see violent crime, there's someone who's getting into, you think because you legalize cannabis that people won't have a need to fight over it and, use weapons and things. That's not always the case. This is also very much about getting a profit from a really good product. So, sad that these things occur. Another area for education are pregnant moms. We're seeing in Pueblo, Colorado specifically, 50% of babies are born THC positive right now. And a lot of the reason for this is that the folks operating the retail stores are marketing this as safe for pregnant women for nausea, especially first trimester, and saying that it's safe for the baby. We know that's not true. We already have studies that show that it is not healthy and that there can be lower birth rate, lower head size at birth, long-term problems. We've studied it through early adolescence, and we're seeing that it can prime a baby's brain for addiction. But this is something, it is very, very difficult to help our pregnant women understand that this is not healthy. THC crosses the placental barrier. It is excreted in the breast milk. It should not be for a pregnant or nursing mom. But the culture in the commercial industry does not support the risks, and so we're having some challenges there. Again, we're seeing the need for substance use treatment arise. Of course, there's often comorbidities here with other substances and alcohol, but we are really destitute of treatment providers and beds. We're often sending our kids in crisis to Kansas and Wyoming and Utah to get treatment because we just don't have the space for them. So again, just more things for consideration. Now, we've seen an influx of our homeless population, and folks will refer to themselves as marijuana refugees. A lot of people think that this is something that I or colleagues of mine kind of unfairly say, but folks, this is their self-proclaimed titles. We came here because we live in a state that doesn't allow this, and so this, you'll see the signs on the street, but our homeless population has increased dramatically. And so we're also struggling with that cost. I don't know with your climate if that will be an issue that you have here, but you do have some neighboring states that don't allow this product, so I could see where that could be an issue. So again, something to be aware of. The 420 celebrations are challenging. We have to issue permits for the celebrations, which have traditionally been kind of civil disobedience demonstrations, and that's nothing new. However, now it's like really overt, and so anytime around April 20th, you're looking at increased law enforcement and sanitation costs and things like that. The issue here is that this is just complete and total public open display of marijuana use, and kids get involved, and there's not a lot of enforcement that can take place because you just really can't go in with 25,000 people and just start busting everybody for public use. So it's challenging. So if people start applying for the permits around 420, you have to decide how, where, when will you allow it? What does that look like? Is it near school? Are the college kids participating? And are they over 21? So there's just a lot of things that go along with it, again, for awareness. We have seen an impact on workplace. We really are seeing that employees are very blatantly and openly saying, I go to work high and I'm proud of it. We have strong rules in our state that protect employers' rights. I believe Illinois has made some changes, but from local experts here that I've called on in my industry who work on workplace drug and alcohol policies, there are still some good protections for employers. We're just concerned about discrimination, right? So, we're trying to look at that and pay attention and educate employers on that. However, we really saw that in year one, even though we have strong employer rights, is that our positive THC drug test in the state tripled from the year before when we were at the national average. That was in year one. We continue to be up there, and now Washington was a little higher than us. Now Oregon's up there, Alaska's up there. So it seems that I keep this slide in here just to show you. I mean, we voted in 2012. 2013 was personal use. This is before retail even opened, and we saw our employee positivities just go bam, straight up. We've also seen an increase in all illicit drugs positivities in our state since this time. And so, that's a challenge. Employers do struggle to find qualified applicants when they require a pre-employment drug test. But for those jobs that are about safety sensitive, this is an electric company, you really can't relax your standard too far, because you're looking at people who are going to be impacted if they don't stay clean and sober and come to work prepared to be safe. So this is an ongoing challenge, and we have some construction companies that say if we get federal money and we have to enforce safe and drug-free by federal standards, we have to hire from out of state because we can't find qualified applicants inside the state, which is not how we want our communities to have to operate. Pay Construction in southern Colorado says for every 75 people we interview, we can find about 15 who can pass the test. That's a lot of money going out to a small business in interview time for staff who conducts those. Nationally, we know that a small business can lose about $7,000 a month in lost revenue from all employee substance use. So what are we doing to support our small business owners? Large businesses typically have a pretty good grip on their policies, and they don't change those much, and they stick to their guns. But it's your small business owner that really ends up suffering. So then lastly, I want to say that, we hear quite often, and this is really the big pitch of this thing is, yeah, but what about all that tax revenue? Often when you hear the numbers associated with the taxes in Colorado, what you're hearing are the sales, and they'll boast sales in the billions. The reality is our revenue is the taxes, so that number isn't very often the number that's quoted. So in our tax revenue overall, year after year after year, and this is the most recent fiscal year, 2017, because again, we're on a fiscal year, so we won't get the 2017, 2018 until the end of this year, right? Because it just ended in August. So our total revenue for these years since we've been in this game, less than 1% of our total state budget. Our state legislators still go into overtime sessions to solve our budget crisis. It has not solved that. I do hear often that, well, if we make the banking legal, it'll solve that this is a cash-only business, and so that'll solve that. Our proprietors in our state bank just fine. Most of them are operating under DBAs. They use banking. Every one of them has an ATM machine in the lobby, and people put their cards in, pull the cash out that gets circulated from the business. This isn't hard. The Safe Banking Act is more about international banking and pulling out the requirements, or maybe I should say the laws that protect money laundering from being legal. So this will have a far-reaching impact to change safe banking. I'm not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea. I don't know. I'm just saying banking is not impossible, but that does not eliminate this cash issue that we have. The cash problem, I think, will always be there. It's just too tempting, right? So you'll hear a lot of stories about how people are dealing with this cash and how it's a safety issue, but banking's not impossible. And also, Credit unions have gotten in and allowed banking. A lot of smaller family-owned independent banks have allowed banking. It's usually your large chains that are really under the scope of the Federal Reserve that are reluctant, obviously, because they'll get penalized for that. So here's another issue that I think we need to pay attention to. First of all, you do have a medical marijuana system. And so a lot of people feel that the medical marijuana system will be hurt or crushed by the adult use. We have found that not to be the case because the taxes for medical are far lower than the retail. So we see people are more prone to go to the medical system because the tax rate's lower. So again, you'll have to weigh that out with what Illinois is doing. But then finally, we do have some preliminary studies from the Centennial Institute that show that in social costs, we're spending $4.50 for every dollar of tax revenue we bring in. And so they just looked at healthcare, high school dropouts, DUIs, which I didn't get into the driving issue for you simply because my understanding is that Illinois is doing zero tolerance. I believe that's correct. Whereas we have something completely different. We have a nanogram standard that we cannot abide by and is challengeable, so we're not getting convictions. It's a big problem. So I didn't include the DUI, although it is a huge issue. If Illinois sticks with the zero tolerance, that'll look completely different. So I didn't want to try to muck that up with you guys going in a completely different direction there. But for us, those DUIs are a big cost, and then the power issue, as I mentioned, is also a drain. So we do have some expenses there, and that's just a fraction. We haven't gotten into all of those healthcare costs, especially on the mental health side. We've got some big gaps to overcome. So one of the things that I find frustrating as I go around the world, I just spent a good bit of time in New Zealand, who is grappling with this in a big way. I hear worldwide Colorado has it figured out and we're doing it right and look to us as a model. But I would say and echo John Hickenlooper, who's been known to say this off and on, we haven't figured anything out. We're still on the cusp. I know some states, I was in a state last week, Oklahoma, and they said, we're so late to the game. And I said, you're so not late to the game. You're still really early in the game, as we all are. So there are many things ahead of us, many challenges, I believe, that we don't even know yet. So we've got a long way to go. My personal opinion is just to be cautious with these things and be aware and be educated and just consider each step wisely. So I went through that really quickly because I wanted to be able to answer your questions, and I'm open to that.
First of all, on behalf of the Village of Woodridge and my fellow elected officials, we thank you very much for being here this evening. Would like to open it up to the board if we have any questions or comments at this time. Please, Trustee Martinez.
I'm just going to read. The Chicago Tribune issued an article a week ago, last Thursday, excuse me, talking about Colorado and the experiences that they have had. And you covered some of that, but it really addresses DuPage County's decision to opt out as the first county in the state for unincorporated locations. And I believe you covered this, but just reading quickly through it, it says that the taxing that is generated, or the revenue generated from taxes on recreational marijuana, does not cover the costs associated with law enforcement and with the medical treatment effort. And I know you cover in certain slides, but do you agree with that statement up to now? I'm not saying in the future, I'm saying up to now.
I appreciate that question. How I would answer that is to say that I recently had the opportunity to take part in an interview with local law enforcement in my community, and hands down, I mean, that could be a direct quote from them to say that we cannot keep up with it all. We are not staffed enough. We don't have the manpower enough. We often hear that one thing that legal cannabis will bring us is lower costs for law enforcement, but the reality of it is it creates a whole other side of what law enforcement has to be involved in, and they're not seeing that to be true. Pueblo says the same thing. Aurora says the same thing. Fort Collins says the same thing, right? So community after community, law enforcement said this is killing us. So I would have to agree with what my local law enforcement says.
Madam Mayor, a lot of what you had up there I don't disagree with, but it's here. So whether we like it or not, the real question is, are we going to allow retail sales? And one of the, a couple of the slides maybe that you had had in the presentation that I saw you give to DuPage County talked about some of the recommendations that you had as far as if you do this, here's some things to keep in mind. I wonder if you could go through that real quickly.
Yes, and in the PDF version of this that you'll receive, I left those slides in. I didn't go through them tonight because I knew that it was more of a public presentation rather than the leadership. But yes, I would absolutely limit the number of establishments and what type of establishments are being allowed. That's something that I see communities, as soon as they fail to do that, which is often an oversight. It's not always intentional. They just kind of don't think about that. It's like however many people come and apply with their license, they just start getting their approvals. That's where we initially start creating chaos. So limiting that commercialization, and again, this is one of the reasons I mentioned over and over, we've got to do better at our education programs, our public service announcements, making sure that obstetricians and pediatricians know how to communicate with moms and parents of children, that our community educators know to communicate with parents about the risks associated with adolescent use. I would say right there is one of our greatest risks is parents hearing in social media that this is safe and a better option for kids when it hands down is not. Personally, as someone who's been in prevention for youth for decades, I think telling parents kids are going to do something so you have to give them an option is a false dichotomy. Parents should be the ones who say, we will keep our bodies and our minds healthy and have bigger, better goals. So this thing that we've bought into that that if parents allow their kids to do this, it's a safer, better option. It's so harmful and toxic to the adolescent brain. So that's a big one for me. And then again, I think one of the things that the Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division says at the state level, it's very, very hard to enforce this. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the budget to do it. The marijuana industry revenue is supposed to fund that. It still to this day does not. So they get what the state allots to them. So often the way that this gets regulated in the whole scheme of things is through the complaint process. And our Marijuana Enforcement Division says to us, this is largely people in the industry complaining about each other for, better business purposes. So it's challenging. So I don't know if the state, I do know that a lot of states leave all of this local control and enforcement up to the local government, and it's on you. So what will that look like? Those are big things that you need to prepare for rapidly. So those are a few of the things, and you'll see some of the other, I do think that especially what we're seeing right now in the news every single week with these deaths related to youth and vaping that we know are largely coming from the cannabis industry. The community needs to crack down on those types of products as soon as possible, and not even related to cannabis if you don't want to. This is a huge problem.
One other question. Is there any reliable data to show that whether or not a community opts in or out, the issues that they end up with, there's a difference?
I will say anecdotally, we are having some experts in our state overlay crime maps with the initial map I showed you on who opted out, and they're saying they feel like it's showing some very significant changes. That's anecdotally. Scientifically and statistically, we have not done a great job at from the outset tracking our statistics, much less prior to this. So we are really struggling with pre and post data. Our post data will end up being several years into this by the time we figure out how to collect all of this properly. So we are struggling with that. But I do hear particularly some behavioral scientists from University of Michigan and some other places say you can overlay these things with the maps, and they're showing some significant changes. So I and several colleagues have asked for published studies on this so that we can see that data, because right now it really is hearsay.
Anyone else?
Madam Mayor.
Please, yes, Trustee Henry.
So just looking at the presentation, it seems like Colorado may have been experienced, maybe we're overwhelmed by the legalization of marijuana for recreational use. So I'm assuming like there was an influx of more residents who could have also contributed to some of those problems. And just in a general sense, like some of the advertisement that you had shown where they're offering free marijuana with the purchase of a dryer or something like that, it just seems a little bit like maybe those were things that were unexpected by the state. I mean, that they didn't kind of write into the plan. And so that being said, it seems like that was kind of the first state. And I mean, everybody was aware, hey, you know, Colorado is doing great because they have recreational marijuana. So you guys were maybe, or Colorado was maybe that first test trial for
Guinea
that.
pig.
Exactly. But have you been following other states that have allowed for medical and recreational marijuana, and if so, what are their results?
You know, I derive a lot of information from the Rocky Mountain HIDA report and their task force. We have HIDAs all over the U.S., high-intensity drug trafficking areas. They track both human trafficking and drug trafficking. So Rocky Mountain is just one of many, many HIDAs, and I know that you have one local in Chicago. So our group has gone to other states to help them understand how and where they've been getting the data from, law enforcement, and, you know, as you saw, the health department, et cetera. So I do know that Washington has posted their first report. It's pretty similar. Oregon should be posting their first report this year. They're claiming it's fairly similar. I haven't read theirs yet. Alaska's just setting up their HIDA for the first time ever, so they have no data. States that are really, really new to this, they will have to learn how to track their data and information. I do see states working hard to implement rules that are different than we have, although a lot of them are very boilerplate, like allowing for 100% THC. In Europe, in Amsterdam, THC over 15% is actually a felony. It's illegal. It's considered a hard drug. This is one of our core mistakes in this country, is allowing for these high THC potencies. That's something that I don't know that your community can control in and of itself. So there's some mistakes that continue to happen like that. Some states are trying to get their arms around some of these things and do them better, like prohibiting these candy flavors and open marketing and things like that. Can they do it? It remains to be seen. I get asked all the time if I can give examples of someone who's doing it well, and I have a broad network of folks in a variety of states, and so I'm always looking for the success story. I'm not hearing it yet. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Many of these states are very, very new to this. it's hard to say what would happen federally. If we change the law federally, there's potential this could all come under FDA control. Then maybe it could look different, but you'd have to also be able to get a grip on what's already happened. So there's greater challenges there as well. I don't know. I think it remains to be seen. And I always say to every community I'm in, do it better. I would love to see someone do it better and to be the new prototype.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, we thank you very much again for the presentation, all the information. We look forward to the follow-up materials that you'll be sending to us, and we will be sharing that with our residents. And again, thank you.
Thank you
so
again.
much.
Thank you.
So this evening, as you know, we did state earlier, we are not voting on this evening. It was for informational for you and for us as a board. We will be looking at November 7th for our actual policy discussion, and then followed up with voting will be first meeting in December. Okay? So this evening, with no further business to come before the village board this evening, I would like to please ask the board for a motion to adjourn. Thank you very much, Trustee Hendricks. A second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Trustee Krusek. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? It is 8:10. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.